Hi again. Welcome back to Killer Bites. We're happy you're here. By show of hand, how many people feel like dating keeps getting harder and harder? Well, I can't see you, but I imagine you feel like me on this. Most people are just out here trying to form a connection and find companionship. And while even under normal circumstances dating can be challenging, this next story I'm about to tell you gives a person even less hope. Today, I want to tell you about John Meehan, also known as Dirty John. John Meehan was born on February 3rd, 1959 into a seemingly picture-perfect family. He was one of 4 children with a loving mother and father. His father ran the Diamond Wheel Casino in San Jose, where John and his siblings spent a lot of time growing up as they cleaned for money. Because he was in that environment, John was surrounded by crime and deceit at an early age. His father would regularly file frivolous or fake lawsuits to pull off insurance scams. Not so picture perfect. Unfortunately, John paid attention to this, later honing his father's deceitful skills himself. He was an incredibly smart child. Not only that, he was athletic and popular. After graduating high school, he started getting into trouble. John had begun working as an orderly in hospitals and also dealing. He'd gotten into college at Santa Clara University, but he wasn't staying out of trouble. He was spending his time scamming people and manipulating women into doing things he wanted. In the 1980s, John was caught for drug dealing, and as part of his plea deal, he turned in his best friend. After this, he left California and in 1988 got a Bachelor of Arts from the University of Arizona. John enrolled at the University of Dayton's law school, but after 2 years, he dropped out. It was around this time that John got his nickname, Dirty John. His friends would also call him Filthy John or just Filthy because of the way he was treating and talking about women. It was also around this time that he met his first wife. In 1990, he married his first wife, Tanya Sells. Tanya was 25 and living in Dayton, Ohio as a nurse anesthetist. When John and Tanya met, he told her he was 26, even though he was actually 31. When they married, none of John's family showed up to the wedding because John didn't invite any of them. He had told Tanya it was because his parents were addicts and he didn't want them to ruin their day. After they were married, John decided to, like his wife, become an anesthesiologist, and Tanya helped John pay for nursing school. Tanya and John had 2 daughters and were married for 10 years before John asked for a divorce. In the entire 10 years of their marriage, Tanya had never met John's family. But when he filed for divorce, Tanya had an urge to locate John's mom. When Tanya tracked her down, John's mother, Dolores, revealed to her that he had lied about his birthday and his full birth name, and that he had a drug charge against him in California. After these revelations, Tanya decided to search the house. What she found was John's hidden supply of surgical anesthetic drugs, which she knew he had no reason to possess outside of the hospital. She informed the police, who began an investigation into John in September of 2000. Tanya and John were officially divorced in 2001. By the beginning of 2002, Ohio police were investigating John once more after a group of anesthesiologists said that he was stealing drugs that he should have been administering to patients. He was also caught trying to submit a patient's urine as his own during a drug test. Things were getting more and more messy for John. Although they were divorced, John started making a series of threatening and violent phone calls to Tanya. He was upset that she had reported him and subsequently that he had lost his job. So he started harassing Tanya. She took him to court, where he was convicted of menacing and received a suspended sentence. He was stripped of his nursing license, and police searched his house, where they found a loaded gun and 45 empty containers for 6 different prescription medications. John pleaded guilty to felony drug theft, but rather than surrendering to authorities, he went on the run. It wasn't until he checked into a hotel in Michigan where police finally found him. When he was found, he was unconscious and surrounded by drug vials. He was taken by ambulance to be treated, but while the ambulance was on the move, rushing to take him to get medical attention, John regained consciousness and somehow unbuckled his restraints, grabbed a drug kit, and jumped out into the road. He was able to get all the way into a nearby JCPenney. Inside the store, he managed to kick a cop in the face before police were finally able to handcuff him. John was sentenced to up to 6 years in prison in Michigan for resisting arrest and possession of drugs. But due to either good behavior or a crowded prison, he only served 17 months of the 6-year sentence, and in 2004, he was released. Between 2004 and 2014, John moved from Ohio back to California and had many more run-ins with the law, continuing to con people to make money. In February of 2014, John pleaded guilty to stalking a woman who he had met at the hospital in Laguna Beach, California. She was recovering from brain surgery, and he introduced himself as her anesthesiologist. I mean, that is so scummy. In the hospital, John and this woman actually ended up dating for a bit, and she became uncomfortable with his suggestions that she transfer money into his bank account to hide it from her estranged husband. Oh, well, I mean, okay, then he was only trying to help her. Well, when she ended their relationship, he not only sent her threatening messages, but he also shared intimate photos of her with her family. In October 2014, John met Deborah Newell. John and Deborah matched on an over-50s dating site. He had just been released from prison 2 days prior for violating a restraining order. And on their first date, John told Deborah he'd served as an anesthesiologist in Iraq and also spent a year with Doctors Without Borders. After years of unsuccessful relationships, Deborah thought she had finally found the person she wanted to be with. He checked all her boxes and swept her off her feet. I mean, he did have some quirks that she didn't love, but was willing to overlook. John would wear his medical scrubs everywhere, even to formal events, and claimed to have no money because all of his income went to his children. Their relationship developed quickly. Deborah thought John was attentive. He was a great listener and always had terrific stories to tell. He told her convincing lies about the homes he owned in Palm Springs and Newport Beach, and he would bring her flowers and groceries and get her car washed. All sorts of little things. Deborah was a successful interior designer and business owner, and she was a mother of 4. Her children were skeptical of the relationship. Jacqueline and Tara, 2 of her daughters, met John and immediately knew something was off. Jacqueline told her mom that John was a creep, and if he was at the house, she wouldn't continue living there. But even with her children voicing concern and disapproval, Deborah and John's relationship progressed, and by November, just 1 month after they met, they moved into a house in Newport Beach that they leased only in Deborah's name. When Tara, the youngest of her children, found that they were living together, a heated argument broke out. The next month, Deborah and John decided to get married in Vegas while on a business trip. No guests were invited. By March 2015, just over 3 months after marrying, Deborah's colored lenses came off. Her nephew, Shad, raised some concerns. He had found out about John's time spent in jail and that he wasn't an anesthesiologist. Deborah pretended like there were no issues with this, but secretly, she started digging through John's stuff at their house. Eventually, she found evidence of all the crimes he'd committed. Everything was there in plain sight. She read about how between 2005 and 2014, Dirty John had seduced and taken advantage of countless women. He would meet these women on a dating site, and after charming them, he'd trick them into giving him their money. When the relationship ended, each time he would go on to harass and terrorize them. By 2014, John had 3 restraining orders against him from 3 different women, and a further 3 women had requested restraining orders as well. Deborah had also discovered evidence from other dating sites, where women had written warnings against dating John. While Deborah was digging through the papers in their house and investigating John further, John had left to get back surgery, which was going to last 3 weeks. Deborah took advantage of him being gone and moved out of their house. Over the next few months, John tried to reconcile with Deborah. He had a story and a justification for each charge that Deborah found. He told her that he had lied because he thought he'd lose her. Somehow that was convincing enough, and they got back together and moved into a new apartment. Luckily, Deborah was no longer entirely certain about John. By March of 2016, Deborah was fully uncomfortable in her marriage to John, and she was even more unhappy about the estrangement with her daughters. John's behavior got worse. When he found out that Deborah was trying to meet up with her daughter, he made violent threats, and that was Deborah's breaking point. She filed to annul the marriage. You know what John's response was to this? Take a wild guess. Yeah, more harassment. John, who now lived in Nevada, started terrorizing Deborah, calling her nonstop and leaving awful messages demanding money and promising to ruin her. She requested a restraining order against him, but an Orange County judge denied the request, stating there was no imminent threat because John lived in another state and had never physically harmed her. In June 2016, John was back in California. Deborah's Jaguar disappeared from her parking spot in front of her office in Irvine. The car was later found a block away, soaked in gasoline with mild fire damage. John had tried and failed to set it completely alight. Surveillance footage showed John stealing it. Now on August 20th, 2016, Jacqueline, Deborah's daughter, saw John waiting outside her apartment. She called her sister Tara to warn her. That evening, as Tara arrived back from work and got out of her parked car in the lot outside the apartment building, John approached her from behind and attacked her with a knife. Tara told Dateline, "He was trying to push me into the car. I tried to get away from him. I was screaming, and he put his hand over my mouth, and I bit as hard as I could." Now, John was much larger than Tara, so she struggled trying to wrestle him away. It was raining, and Tara had on heavy rain boots that had great traction, which helped her stabilize.
So I start kicking him. kicking his forearms. And at this point, I realized that he has a knife. I was able to kick the knife out of his forearm and it landed on my right hand side. I'm right handed. I thought I stabbed him in the chest, in the front of the chest. My memory still won't allow me to fully see where I stabbed him, but I ended up stabbing him in the back of the chest, like around his shoulder area, 11 times. And then I heard him gasp. And so I was holding his body and holding his head. And then I did 2 stab wounds to the head, and these are the ones that I actually remember. So I called my mom and I told her, "I'm so sorry. I think I killed your husband. I knew he would do this."
But John wasn't dead yet. Paramedics arrived and administered CPR and his pulse returned. However, once at the hospital, he was declared brain dead. His sister made the decision to take him off life support, and at 57 years old, John Meehan passed away, and no memorial service was held. The one good thing that Deborah was able to come away with after her horrific relationship with John was that she knew she wanted to help other victims of domestic abuse. And that's the story of Dirty John. And I'm always baffled how people like that can get away with things for so long. What are your thoughts? Let me know in the comments below. And thanks for watching Killer Bites.